Hello, I'm Richard Dadd and I'm a comedian, and this is an interview about comedy. It's a chat that I had with the comedy writer Andy Hamilton, and he talks about all kinds of things, like all the various sitcoms he's got to his name, his thoughts about writing, his memories of people like Douglas Adams and Geoffrey Perkins, all kinds of things like that. Before we crack on, a bit of context. About a decade or so ago, I had a podcast with my friend Dan, and we interviewed all kinds of famous people. But the thing is, if you had a podcast in about 2009, because that's when we started it, you would find that a lot of people didn't really understand what a podcast was, and you'd have to keep explaining it to them, and they'd think that they needed a specific kind of iPod to listen to it and things like that. And it seemed to me that the core of people who were listening to podcasts at the time were generally only engaging with podcasts if they'd got the name Ricky Gervais at the front of them. So it seemed increasingly to me like it was a medium that didn't have much momentum behind it. And so we'd got other creative projects we wanted to do anyway, so we just kind of stopped doing the podcast because we thought podcasts were not the future. And that will go down in history as one of the worst predictions that I've ever made. Fast forward a decade and now I'm the only person who hasn't got a podcast. But the theatre that we made the podcast in conjunction with, the Gulbenkian Theatre in Canterbury, they'd got a philosophy about the guests which we didn't necessarily share, which was that they thought it was more important to prioritise people who had got forthcoming shows. Whereas if you interviewed somebody at the theatre, that would mean that they were doing their show at the time. So by the time you listened to the podcast, their show had been and gone. So that means that when I interviewed Andy Hamilton at the theatre, we only had limited ability to use that footage, unfortunately. So that means that for a decade, I've had this interview just knocking about on a hard drive. And I thought, here we are in the COVID-19 lockdown, as you can probably tell from my hair. And so I've got limited ability to perform, but I'm still engaging with thinking about comedy and the idea of comedy and writing and creativity. And I thought it was a good opportunity to dust this interview off and, give people an opportunity to listen to it. And of course, Andy Hamilton is famous for playing the devil in his sitcom Old Harry's Game. And in recent times, I've been doing my own comedy portrayal of Satan, so there's accidentally a nice symmetry there. But the time at which we'd recorded this interview, he'd recently done the first sitcom of the first series of Outnumbered, which at the time I remember finding very interesting because it got a realism to it which most domestic sitcoms don't have, and I thought that was quite an interesting thing. So that's where we are in time when this was recorded. So crack on.
I find with characters that if they're working, they become, I'm going to sound like I'm mentally ill now, but they become like real voices in your head.
Right.
And you do, if something's going well, you do achieve that sort of state of grace where you kind of know how that character would react and how they would phrase it, and so
how did you get started as a writer?
I was at Cambridge University and I didn't join Footlights because, to be honest, I wasn't that interested in performing then, but I wanted to meet girls, so I joined a thing called QUELS, which is the Cambridge University Light Entertainment Society, which did shows for prisons and old people's homes and mental hospitals and anyone who couldn't get away, basically. And I initially, because I was a rarity, I was a student with a car. My brother had sold me his car for 30 quid. I had this old Volkswagen Beetle, so I could drive lights and costumes around. So I joined this organisation initially as a driver, and then I thought, this looks like quite good fun. So then I joined one of the, it was all divided into subgroups, and we did old people's homes, and then I got more of a taste for it. And every now and then, that particular organisation would put on a commercial review to raise money to fund the rest of it. But the problem was that there was short material. They'd had the same material for the last 15 years, so we were doing sketches that felt very dated.
Yeah.
So I started writing new material, and then slowly, I did more and more. And then we went to Edinburgh. I went to Edinburgh for 2 years running in my second, and in my final year I went. And at the end of the show, a young BBC producer called Geoffrey Perkins came in and came backstage and said he liked the material and had I thought about writing for radio comedy.
That's fantastic. So it's Geoffrey Perkins who got you?
Yeah.
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. But you probably know Jeff died recently in very sad circumstances. But it was Jeff, yeah. I think he was a bit pissed. He says he wasn't, but my memory of him is that he was a bit pissed. But so whether the material looked funnier than it really was, I don't know.
I must ask you, if you were doing gigs in places like old people's
Yeah.
homes, what on earth kind of material were you doing?
Well, it depended. I mean, if it was a psychiatric geriatric ward,
Yeah.
then it was as basic as you could possibly get. The big challenge was prisons, and they were often quite good audiences,
Right.
partly I suppose because they were starved of entertainment, but they were boisterous as well sometimes. It was a terrible Tarzan sketch that we used to do, which involved lots of people jumping on stage as Tarzan in their underpants. And I remember being the first Tarzan to jump on, it was a Borstal in Scotland somewhere, and I had the first line, and it must have been 7 or 8 minutes before I could even make myself heard. So we used to do panto. I started writing pantos, and we'd do those for big audiences, 500-600 kids.
But when you went to Edinburgh,
Yeah.
how did things develop then in terms of your material?
Oh, well, there I wrote in fact, all of the review in '76. You know, I was beginning to find a sort of voice, I suppose. But then Geoff was starting on a programme called Weekending.
Yes.
Weekending was on Radio 4. It was a topical comedy magazine. And you wrote during the week, and then it was recorded on a Friday morning without an audience, edited on a Friday afternoon, and then it went out Friday night.
So that would have been your first taste of having to write topical
Yeah.
material. Now, something I must ask you about is the format of the sitcom.
Yeah.
Because I would say that sitcoms that you have to your name all have something rather innovative about them. Whether it's something like the topical aspect of Drop the Dead Donkey and things like that. Just tell me about your approach to the medium of a sitcom.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Like Bedtime I wrote on my own, but Drop the Dead Donkey I wrote with Guy Jenkin, who I also write Outnumbered with. And one of the tasks we always try to ensure that it's unique in some way.
Right, so you do make a conscious decision.
Yeah, we make a conscious decision to be different, Well, no, the first time we wrote together was on a sitcom called Shelley, which already existed.
Right.
That was a sitcom, an ITV sitcom, where the writer who created it had kind of dried up and we were brought in. So that was the first time. So there you had a template.
Yeah.
There already existed characters with voices. And then I devised a show called the Kit Curran Radio Show, which in my head was going to be like a sort of English version of Bilko.
Right.
But I couldn't get what was in my head onto the screen for various reasons. But one of the reasons was that when we started out, there were no writer-producers.
Right.
So, key creative decisions, and practical decisions as well, were out of your hands. And although it wasn't that feudal, you were allowed to express an opinion, but ultimately you couldn't shape it. So it failed really as a programme ultimately, because it's hard enough to make a comedy work anyway. But unless you're working for brilliant people who know what they're doing, if you're working with people who mean well but aren't brilliant, then you're just hamstringing the whole thing. So we sort of went down the road of becoming writer producers, and luckily for us, that it was around that time that Channel 4 began.
Right.
And spawned this crop of independent companies, and suddenly it was much easier to get into that position.
Yeah, because you've ended up in the position where you direct Outnumbered, and you directed a lot of Drop the Dead Donkey.
Yeah, well, no, Liddy Oldroyd directed Drop the Dead Donkey, and she was a fantastic director, fantastic studio director especially. What used to happen on Drop the Dead Donkey was, because Liddy, she was a working director, that was her main source, her only source of income, she would often be coming off another job.
Right.
And the exteriors of Drop the Dead Donkey, the sort of Damien Day running around in a civil war in South America type stuff, we had to film a couple of weeks before the studios. So it was often a problem for Liddy to direct those. So me or Guy, we'd often direct those.
I see, right.
Liddy directed the studio stuff. But obviously, we'd kind of each done some sort of directing off and on various projects by then. So.
If there is a God, what do you think he's going to make of Old Harry's game?
I don't know. Well, we'll have to hope he has a sense of humour.
I should think he probably does.
Well, he ought to, because he ought to be big enough to be relaxed about things, shouldn't he? I don't know. I mean, interestingly, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I bet it causes a lot of offence and all that," but the truth is that it doesn't cause that much offence. I'll get the odd letter in red ink, with random capitals. But we did the last series, and some Quakers sent in a Bible that they wanted the cast to sign, and they wanted me to sign it as Satan. So
That's bizarre.
It is bizarre. But I think it's probably because he's quite Satan in Old Harry's game is sort of moral, although he's very cynical and everything. In fact, he's probably closer to the Old Testament Satan than the Church's version of Satan.
Right.
The Church's version of Satan is this monster who tries to entice you into sin just so he can get you down into hell and be horrible to you. But in the Old Testament, the word Satan means adversary. It's like a barrister. And God sends a Satan to test somebody's sort of moral actions. So in a way, the one in Old Harry's game is more like that. But no, I mean it's interesting. Well, I'll probably end up talking about it tonight because various adventures in my life have happened. In fact, I'm going to reenact. I'm going to do a battle tonight. I'm going to record a battle with the audience in the second half. But it's got a very devoted following.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, well, talking of this evening, you're here at the Gulbenkian doing The Hat of Doom.
Yeah.
Your stage show. I mean,
Yeah.
am I right in hearing that this is the first time you've toured?
First time I've toured, yeah. I've done one-man shows on a kind of one-off basis,
Right.
off and on over the years.
So why have you decided to do it now then?
I don't know. Well, it was a source of regret to me a few times when I've done it and really enjoyed it and then thought, it'd be nice to be doing it again in a few days' time. And to be honest, there just hasn't been enough room opening up in a year to put together at all. Funny enough as well, I think 10 years ago I probably wouldn't have relished it as much, I think.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think probably I've reached that point where my fund of jokes and stories and anecdotes and stuff, I've subjected them on all my friends and relatives, so I've got to find new people. So out I go and inflict them on strangers around the country.
Yes, and presumably also having done gigs in old people's homes and mental institutions,
Yeah.
you have nothing to fear from an audience.
No, that was doing Tarzan to a Scottish Borstal. That took away a lot of fear. Yeah.
Right, I'm delighted to say Outnumbered is coming back for a second series.
Yes.
Tell us about the process of making it.
Well, what happened was me and Guy were trying to work out, what our next project might be. And we both felt that no domestic sitcom had ever managed to capture the real substance of life with small children. And it's for obvious practical reasons. I mean, it's very difficult to work with small children because they're small children. Performances from kids, they can be strangely unkid-like, and, all sorts of legal restrictions on their hours and stuff like that. And in bedtime, I'd done a scene with my daughter, Isabel, when she was about 7. So I was chatting to the actor she was going to be doing the scene with, Kevin McNally, and I think it was Kevin who said, well, don't show her the script. Don't show the script. Give her the sequence, and I'll remember my lines. I know what I have to say, but let her say it. And the other thing we did was we gave her a big toy lobster to play with. Because the other thing that I didn't like in kids' performances is that they always nail their eye line to the person they're talking to. Well, anyone who's ever spent any time with small kids knows that there is always something more interesting in the room than you, and they talk to you without looking at you a lot of the time. So anyway, that scene worked really well, and so I was chatting to Guy about that technique, and Guy had tried a few similar things, on pieces of his, and so we thought, well, what if you did a piece where, it's written and you know where you're heading, but you never give the kids the script, so that everything that comes out of their mouth, although you may have suggested it to them, they're going to, they're going to put it into their own words. They're going to formulate their own phrasings, and they're going to pick their nose in the middle, and they're going to, and then from that sprang and that happens a lot in Outnumbered. But then there's also another kind of scene where you kind of just give the kid the starting point, and then you just let the kid go and see what happens, and what, obviously sometimes it doesn't work, but what you sometimes get is stuff that comes out of a kid's head that you could never never write.
Because it has that authenticity about it.
Yeah, because it comes from a kid's way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
Remember there was a scene in the first series where the little boy and the little girl were arguing. He shot her with a Hoover, which was doubling as a machine gun, and she was dressed as a fairy, and she said, "You can't kill a fairy with a machine gun." And he thought that was rubbish. And they both argued their corner with complete conviction, But there was a moment in it where she said, no. She said, because fairies are fantastically fast. She said, and before you could pull the trigger, I would make myself very, very small. I'd fly down your mouth into your body. And she said, and then I would chop up your bones with a tiny big axe. And I thought, that thing, a tiny big axe, you would never write.
Yeah.
But a kid, of course, that's a kid's logic, isn't it? I know what she means. She means it's tiny, but it's big compared to her as the miniature fairy.
Yeah.
And that, so that kind of thing, you could just never...
No. That little girl who plays Karen comes out with some amazing stuff.
Yeah. And we gave him, there's one that's going out in about a month. We gave them things like what is cool, what constitutes cool. And so they just argued about, so you get these different perceptions of what is cool.
Yeah. Talking about Outnumbered, when I was watching it, what I found, like, in terms of the plot structure, I found it very interesting. But especially if you're talking about the large sector being improvised or just suggested to the child actors.
Yeah.
I would have said that there was one episode where the parents, Claire Skinner and Hugh Dennis, were trying to get the kids off to bed so that they could spend some time together.
Yeah.
Which worked brilliantly as a structure, but it was very much like a sitcom plot structure. You know what I mean? Less so perhaps than some of the others. Certainly the first episode where they're just trying to get to school. Yeah. I wonder if after the approach you took in the first series, how you've approached this idea of plot structures, episodic plot structures.
Well, what we've done in this one, at root, some of them are quite conventional plots, Yeah. A problem like that, it's observed, it's anyone with small children will recognise that scenario, but, we don't shy away from a plot necessarily because it's conventional. What we'll try and do is bend it, like, I'm trying to think what there is in the new series. We've handed it in now, I've forgotten it. There's a running subplot that blossoms into a plot, which is about the practical problem of the grandfather's early onset dementia.
Yeah.
But there are things like there's a fairly conventional jealousy plot, for instance, which is the husband is jealous. She's working for a new boss, and she keeps saying how wonderful he is, and it just starts to get him down, and it starts to sort of undermine their relationship. So hopefully we just pushed it that little bit further than it would.
Does Samantha Bond's character come back?
She's in the first episode. There's a wedding. The first episode is a wedding. The big question of the episode is whether they can get through the wedding without Claire Skinner and Samantha Bond kicking off. So it's like one of those weddings where everyone's walking on eggshells all the time.
What advice would you give to any budding writers or comedians or performers?
That's really difficult. Well, I was a little bit wary of this question because I'm likely to be pretty out of touch.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's a whole new environment out there now with YouTube, and you're talking about a divergence, sort of mushrooming of opportunities to make stuff that wasn't available when I started. I think it's easier to make something and get it out there. It's much harder to get paid for it because obviously this is an environment that's it's viral and it's nobody really earns any money yet doing it. So at one level it's great, I think, because it means people get their hands on the train set much earlier than we did.
Yeah.
The downside is it'll be hard for them to pursue it as single-mindedly as a profession, because they'll reach a point, there'll come a point when they've got, just their running costs of their lives will start to make it hard. And so I think there'll be quite a high sort of dropout rate.
Right.
It's probably more democratic in some ways, there's more, the access is wider. So I think the only thing you can do really is, if you want to write, the first thing is write. Most of it will never see the light of day, but it is all experience. If you're interested in performing yourself, then perform. Otherwise, get involved with theatre groups. Just get out there and do it. And I suppose then, if you discover you got a real passion for it, and if you have got a talent, which I think after a while you'll sense, because the audience will kind of tell you, then the next phase is not getting disheartened if you get a period of rejections, because rejection is, unfortunately, something they never do when you go and talk at writing courses and stuff. I always look at it and think there really should be a section about dealing with rejection. Same for actors.
Yeah.
Because it's everybody, you have rejection in all departments of life, but professionally it's very much in the foreground for writers and actors. And the key thing I always say is, just because something has been rejected does not mean that it is crap or that you are crap. Mm-hmm. I'd started on the same day as Douglas Adams.
Started what on the same day?
I started work at the BBC
Radio
right, really?
On
the same day. The first time I got a retainer,
yeah.
I was on £2 a minute, and I had a guarantee of 2 minutes. So I was on £4 a week minimum. But then I got, I'd been writing on weekending for a while, and Douglas wrote for weekending a bit, but not very successfully. And then we were both put on a show called The News Headlines, and Douglas quit after about 2 weeks. But all the time he was working on this idea about a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and about the Earth was being destroyed, and we all sat there and thought, oh, poor Douglas, he's gonna die a pauper. And, but what he did was he believed in it and he stuck at it, and and in the end he got it made. And,
with the help of Geoffrey Perkins again.
Yeah, with Jeff's help. But your idea, it's not just about how good it is. There's questions of luck and timing. It has to arrive on someone's desk at just the right moment. The thing is, I suppose, not to put all your eggs in one basket. Write something, and then tout it around, push it, pursue people, nag people by all means, but make sure you're also writing something else. You should never be in that position where you're jumping if the phone rings.
Well, on the subject of keeping stuff going and moving on, you're doing your live show at the moment, and you've got a second series of Outnumbered coming out. What else have you got planned?
I don't know. I genuinely don't know. We'll wait and see whether the BBC commissioned the third series of Outnumbered. That takes up quite a chunk of the year.
I bet, yeah.
Sort of 7-8 months maybe. I'm doing another series of Old Harry's Game, which I'm supposed to be writing now. Recording in January. I don't know. There's various things that I'd like to get away.
Yeah. Do you have any unrealised unrealised ambitions? Like what?
What ambitions?
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to write a book. I'd like to do a stage. I did a stage piece in the late 70s for the Old Vic Youth Theatre, but I'd like to do some more stage work.
What about film? Because there was the Drop the Dead Donkey film mooted at one point, wasn't
there? There was. Well, we wrote it in fact, and but that fell at the budget hurdle. Like most film scripts, in some form or another. Film, as in movies.
Yeah.
I'm less interested in now, just because we had a flirtation with that, both individually and as a pair, me and Guy. And I'm not very taken with the sort of film world.
Right.
TV is quite mad.
Okay.
And the values often get, pretty distorted.
Right.
But the percentage of insanity in film seems that much higher, and once you're talking anything above the budget of a little independent movie, once you get above 3 million, then you really are beholden to the money, and the money can drop in and out at the drop of a hat. And it's capricious, and if you're lucky you'll get someone who cares about the movie, but for most of them it's just... And they are insane. I mean, I remember we were trying to tout a film just after 4 Weddings and a Funeral had done well. And really, every project we were putting forward, we were talking to some serious film people, but really all they really wanted was something like 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
Right.
So they'd say, do you know Hugh Grant? So you'd say, what name? Say hello to? Yeah. And they go, all right, because I remember this chilling line this bloke said to American guy, because the truth is they are mostly Americans. And he looked at us, he said, only we want to be in the Hugh Grant business. And I thought, oh, that's a chilling line, But Hugh Grant doesn't know it yet, but he is now officially a business.
Yeah.
I mean, TV is led to a certain extent by results,
Yeah.
Figures, if something is successful, then people will try and emulate it. But it's like an obsession in film. If the trains will run the way the film industry's run, what would happen is they look at the trains and they'd say, right, the 911 out of Waterloo to Portsmouth, that train is packed every morning. That is a successful train. What we need are more 911s out of Waterloo to Portsmouth. Then what will happen is, they'll do 4 more 911s all evening. When the other 4 flop and are empty, they'll then say, 911s trains to Portsmouth don't work, and they'll probably cut the original one. Do you know what I mean? They actually they swing violently from extreme position. TV is a bit less like that. Yeah. I think the idea of being hot in film, which is a very infantile idea, is so strong. Yeah. Whereas in TV, there's an element of it. I mean, it's interesting that very few film actors or film writers get to have like the second career. In TV, you'll quite often see someone come around again, maybe 2 or 3 times. Yeah. You don't really get that in film, to be honest. Not now. But I mean, one day it'd be nice to do. I often watch a movie and think, would it be brilliant to have 600 extras and do the Battle of Agincourt, but mind you, no one does that anymore.
No, you can make a movie of revolting people.
Yeah. But you got to get a one-armed, one-legged, one-eyed, one-eared.
You could do that with a bit of CG.
It's a long-time makeup, isn't it?
Yeah, what about the world of radio then?
Yeah.
It's obviously a smaller world.
It's a smaller, in some ways a more grown-up world. And I suppose that's because it's the numbers that produce the insanity. And the fact that, to make a movie you need backers. Yeah. And to make a TV program you either need a big chunk of license payers' money, or you need, a company that's funded by advertising. So there's always money behind it. But in radio, to be honest, the numbers are really small. So that takes away a lot of the fear, a lot of the paranoia. If you experiment and your program doesn't quite work, you won't have taken anyone's career down with you, and you won't have taken your own career down either. The other attractive thing about it is that the distance between what you write on the page and doing it is very short. Right. It's what you write, a performer, a microphone, and a producer, and that's sort of it, really. So creatively, it's a more attractive medium. It's more plastic in many ways than the visual mediums. It's a lovely place to work. Yeah. But it's a great environment, And the thing about radio, which I think will continue to be true, is the audience isn't sort of fickle. Right. It's quite interesting that radio audiences have been pretty consistent. I mean, I think it's a bit more fragmented now, like everything else, with people listening on, different outlets and stuff. Fundamentally, in fact, radio often flourishes when things go a bit tits up, I mean, people do, it's a thing that people go back to, it's a thing people listen to in their cars or in their bath or, Yeah. It's interesting, it gets in the cracks of people's lives in a way that telly never does, because telly you have to make a certain, I mean, sure, research shows that most people watching telly are only watching with one eye, and they're probably doing other stuff at the same time. But, it doesn't follow you in the way that... I mean, if you do a radio show and it does well, the first thing you notice in the letters is people saying, I was stuck in a traffic jam on the A11, I was doing my head in, and then this came on and it cheered me up,
So presumably with radio being such an attractive medium and with it having these areas that mean that it's it's very easy to get on and have that kind of creative control, presumably it was not a very difficult decision for you to move Trevor's World of Sport from BBC One onto Radio 4 when you were...
Well, no, it was a decision that was made for me in a way, because Telly bend it, so...
I didn't realise that.
Yeah. But I still wanted to write it because I liked the characters and I thought I had a lot to say within the piece. So Radio 4 were great.
Yeah, and then it went on and did 3 more series, didn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
All right, well, I think that was all of my questions. Well, Andy Hamilton, thank you very much. It's
Pleasure.
a pleasure, yeah.
Thank you.
So there we are, and now it's a decade later, and ultimately he did have a film come out which was called What We Did on Our Holiday with Billy Connolly and David Tennant, and ultimately there were 5 series of Outnumbered, and I think it did evolve into a more conventional feeling sitcom as time went by, I think inevitably as a result of the children getting older. And he had a novel come out which was called The Star Witness, and loads of other things as well. And meanwhile, I'm doing stand-up comedy, or at least I am when there's not a global pandemic going on. So if you like comedy about Satan and things like that, then who knows, maybe you might enjoy my stuff. In which case, click through to the Richard Dad Comedian Facebook page and give it a like. Cheers!